Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato. We're coming to you tonight live after day 2 of the NFL Draft 2023. A very exciting night for the New York Giants, in my opinion. At this point, the Giants have now selected with their first 3 picks, Nick, 3 players who were all at one point actually mocked to go to the Giants with their 25th overall pick in the first round. That does not guarantee that you knock the draft out of the park by any means. And they even drafted a player tonight who both of us admittedly are not as high on as that consensus. And that consensus we were going by was, okay, some people are saying he's a first-round pick. We didn't really view him as a first-round pick. But he goes, what? Almost 50 picks after that range. So from the Giants pick, it was 50 picks and it was or a little less than 50 picks, 48 picks after. So it's a different mindset when you're evaluating a player in that in that way. Like it's no longer is Jalen Hyatt, and we'll get to that. That player is Jalen Hyatt. It's no longer, do we like Jalen Hyatt at 25? It's do you like Jalen Hyatt at 73? And that's the whole point of that is it's a different gamble. You're investing a different kind of asset. So tonight, the Giants traded up for Jalen Hyatt in round 3, going from 89 to 73 and giving up their 4th round pick in this draft. Last night, they traded up to get Deonte Banks, the corner. They gave up their 5th and their 7th. And they sat and they stayed patient, which after the draft, Joe Schoen said in his presser, I'm not a very patient guy. I struggled to not even trade up in the 2nd round. I think we're going to see a lot of trade ups, honestly, during this Giants tenure. The Bills did it a lot with Brandon Beane. I just feel like, but not always, because this is the cool thing about Joe Schoen, Nick, and I tweeted about this. I feel like for the first time in my lifetime, and I am including Ernie Accorsi in this, who, did a good job with the Eli Manning trade, but it wasn't like the greatest haul ever for the Giants. It was fair. It was good value. They got Rivers and a lot of pick and a first next year and a second, an early second. Like it was a fair trade. But more than any GM I've ever had, including Accorsi, I feel like Joe Schoen has the best feel for how to maneuver in a draft from a trade standpoint. Because last year he traded back twice in the 2nd round. This year he traded up twice in rounds 1 through 3. So that was something that I also took away that I was very excited about. But how did you feel about how he maneuvered in this day 2 and just the overall haul that we got?
Dan, ladies and gentlemen, Giants fans, I am really excited about the 2023 NFL Draft for the New York Giants. Landing Deonte Banks is something that I said on this podcast, put all the egg on my face, get all the yolk all up in my beard, bro, because I said he wasn't going to be there at pick 25. He was there at pick 24. Giants traded up, landed him, only had to part ways with 2 day 3 picks. And now Michael Schmitz fell to pick 57. I'm ecstatic about that. Michael Schmitz, look, I didn't want the Giants to invest around 1 grade in these centers. I don't think these centers are quite Creed Humphrey, but I don't think there have been a lot of centers like Tyler Linderbaum or Creed Humphrey coming through the draft in recent years. I really like Michael Schmitz's game. I feel like he has an incredibly high floor. I feel like he's a very good football player, quick hands, quick to engage. We'll get into scouting stuff a little bit later. Good footwork. Range too, especially when he has to reach 2 techniques and stuff like that. Like he's good at the line of scrimmage, and he's also solid in space too. So I really like the Michael Schmitz pick. And then I love the conviction. That's the word that we used in yesterday's podcast. I'm going to use it again. You wanted a speed type of wide receiver. Marvin Mims went off the board. Tank Dell went off the board. You traded up and you got your guy, Jalen Hyatt, who was probably in some sort of cluster in terms of players who have play speed. That's what Joe Schoen said in his post-game press conference. He's like, look, yeah, he ran 4.3 and some change, but you could feel it was tangible, the play speed of Jalen Hyatt when he was out there, when Joe Schoen was at the game where he scored 5 touchdowns against Alabama, went over 200 yards on just 6 catches too, just absolutely torched Nick Saban's defense. Jalen Hyatt did. So the Giants went up, traded for him, parted ways with that day 3 pick. And you know what? I'm okay with that because you felt like that was your guy. And we know the Giants sucked at creating explosive plays last year. Dead last. Think about the pathetic offenses, Dan, that were in the NFL last year. The Pittsburgh Steelers, the Los Angeles Rams, gross. The Jets, they all had more explosive plays than the New York Giants, who won a freaking playoff game. Now you add Jalen Hyatt and Darren Waller and even guys like Paris Campbell to this equation. You're starting to cook with fire. Daniel Jones, let's see what you can make, baby.
Yeah, and we'll get into the evaluations on these players, some scouting stuff from Nick and myself as well, some grades, some numbers, and also the quotes from Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll, and these players, because I think those are important. But one thing that stood out to me, just to kind of cherry pick a little bit here, from what Joe Schoen said in his post-draft presser tonight, it sounds like the Giants had to be really, really patient to not trade up in that 2nd round, because I felt, based on his comments, and we'll get to them a little bit later, that Michael Schmitz was well above anyone who was left on the board at the time. They said they had other guys. They even said Jalen Hyatt was in the range for them at the pick they took, John Michael Schmitz at 57 overall. But from what he said, it felt like they really had a much higher grade on John Michael Schmitz than anyone else left on the board. So that for sure got me excited. I thought it was really interesting to hear how that process went for them. I also noticed both with the John Michael Schmitz and the Jalen Hyatt pick. Obviously, for Hyatt, it makes more sense since they traded up for it. But those picks were turned in within like a minute, right? There's no more like, wait the whole clock out, or the NFL didn't tell you anything past round one as far as that goes. And they really had a conviction on these players. That's been the case really throughout his tenure, even dating back to last year, right? He took Wan'Dale Robinson at 44. That's a conviction pick, right? If you're going to take Wan'Dale Robinson at 44 with 0 percentile, arm length and wingspan, that's a conviction pick. I feel the same way about Josh Azudu. That was also a conviction pick by the New York Giants. Obviously, the first 2 picks from last year, not so much, just easier picks to make. But one thing interesting, by the way, just came to my mind with the Wan'Dale thing. Both Wan'Dale and Hyatt, Nick, have 20th percentile hand size. So clearly that's not a factor in this evaluation. Like, is their hand size going to impact them? And I do think, like, you brought this up to me when we first did Jalen Hyatt profile, and then I went back and watched more because of what you said. And I did think upon watching more of Jalen Hyatt that his hands were actually better than I first originally gave him credit for. And that's something that really stands out about Hyatt to me. We're going to jump all over the place between Schmitz and Hyatt. So just bear with us. We'll talk about both. But when it comes to Hyatt, it's like, that's something I am concerned a little bit about in Wan'Dale Robinson's profile. I don't know how concerned I am with Hyatt. And people are like, what is the difference between Hyatt and Slayton? Well, for starters, I think that Hyatt does offer more vertical speed and better ball tracking ability. But in addition to the ball tracking ability, I think he just has better hands on those vertical routes as well, and on the deep overs. Because we know even on the deep overs, Darius Slayton drops some passes. Even on kind of like the shallow throws, Darius Slayton dropped some passes. I think there was the one in I'm forgetting now, the one that maybe the Eagles game, but that was the long pass. I don't know. I'm not remembering now from last season, but he dropped kind of like a shorter one too. So I think that's kind of the main difference here with a prospect like Hyatt versus somebody like Slayton. But I just thought it was interesting because despite having those small hands, Nick, he was actually pretty damn good when he went away from his frame and used his hands to catch the ball down the field.
He has 9-inch hands, ran a 4.4 at the combine with a 1.50 10-yard split. And I also just think he looks faster than that on tape. And we're going to get into Josh Heupel's offense. Look, he came out of a air raid offense. It was spread. Everything was spread. They used every inch of the field. He would be the number 2 receiver, aligned 5 yards and a plus split off the numbers as a number 2 receiver, meaning the number 1 receiver is basically on the sideline. That's just how that offense operated. So what that does to the defense is it forces the defense to do very unconventional things because you got to protect the run. And now you're spread out like crazy. This gave Jalen Hyatt an advantage while running routes. And that's one of the reasons why projecting Jalen Hyatt forward is a little bit difficult. We haven't seen many successful wide receivers come out of this type of system throughout recent memory, right? The air raid type of system. Another issue with Jalen Hyatt is press, right? He didn't really face a lot of press. He's going to be pressed up at the line of scrimmage. So you got to give him free looks. You got to get him on the move, motion, things of that nature, align him in the slot, which he did quite often at Tennessee. But when you have a player like this who has a bunch of question marks on his profile, if he has that difference-making trait, if he has one difference-making trait, then at this point of the draft, it's completely worth it, even if you're going to trade up, especially when that difference-making trait being his separation ability and his ability to take the top off of defenses was your biggest vulnerability. You couldn't create explosive plays, so you had to sustain offense, get to third down, and then be hyper efficient on third down. That's how the Giants were successful. That typically doesn't carry over year after year. You need to have those chunk plays. You need to have those, hey, we just got an interception. Let's have a sudden change type of play to strike 40 yards down the football field. The Giants just did not have that in their arsenal last year. Jalen Hyatt significantly helps the Giants' chances to achieve that goal this season.
I think you nailed it there. And I think even when he's not doing what you just said, Nick, he still can be beneficial to your offense from a schematic standpoint in multiple ways. The first one being, if he is just running those routes and the ball's not coming there, it is giving the defense something else to account for. And they have to play those safeties further off the ball than they did last year against the Giants. And on the flip side, or in addition to that, it's also the corners have to play a little bit further off Jalen Hyatt than they would any of those receivers. I mentioned it a lot last year when we watched the tape, and I just put it on Twitter a few minutes ago. Like, when we watched the tape, dude, there was not a single receiver who was being lined up, who these corners lined up anywhere near 10 yards, like anywhere really off the ball, except for Darius Slayton. That was the only one who they were giving any kind of respect to the ability to beat them vertically over the top. And with Hyatt, they have to give him that kind of respect. Now, there's obviously the flip side to that, Nick. there could be a case where he's not good against press man coverage, and teams don't give him that space because they just all choose to kind of press bail or press jam him at the line of scrimmage and mess with him. But I really feel like if you use press bail technique against Jalen Hyatt, he could potentially just make you really pay for that. And again, even if the ball doesn't come there, it opens up space in the middle of the field now for Darren Waller or Daniel Bellinger or Isaiah Hodgins to win on those routes. It's also that. And there's another route, like everyone's just talking about. And just to back it up before I even say this, Nick, I think you bring up a good point. Like when you're just thinking about like how to build out an NFL franchise, what you want in your wide receivers specifically. Now we're talking about this position. Sometimes having that one dominant trait is so much more important than all the things you're concerned with. And we didn't even go over all the concerns, right? Like I have greater concerns than just the system. I'm concerned about his play strength. I feel like he was weak at the top of a lot of his routes, especially the in-breaking ones. And the weirdest thing for me with Hyatt, by far my biggest like knock on him, is just a guy like this should be much better than he is after the catch. Way more creative of a receiver after the catch. You watch his tape and you do not see what you need to see after the catch. Like this is not like watching Zay Flowers in the open field. This is not like watching Tyler Scott in the open field. Go ahead.
I agree with that, but I will say this. He didn't have many opportunities to make plays after the catch, at least in the intermediate to deep parts of the field, because he was usually blowing past people and there were blown coverages, and it was just the defense not accounting for the explosive nature of Hendon Hooker in that offense.
True. Also, if he wasn't running those types of 9 routes, he was also just running like deep overs that like those are tough routes to create a lot after the catch. Like by the time you catch, it's an intermediate route. The DB is usually able to then catch up and tackle you like right at that point of the catch. But what I was going to say is it's not just the 9 routes. Like right away, he's also going to run those deep overs better than anyone can on this Giants offense. And when this Giants passing game was really clicking, there were 2 moments for me that stood out last year on tape. It was first that Packers game in London when they were just ripping up that defense. And again, bad coordinator in Green Bay. It was really weird film. Obviously, we saw a lot of breakdowns with that from a defensive standpoint. And the next team I'm going to talk about, their game against Minnesota, it's a very similar case with a lot of breakdowns in the secondary. But either way, what we did see was that, the return to the deep crossers from Brian Daboll. He loves the deep crossers. He leaned on them like crazy in Buffalo with Josh Allen. And then when we really hit our stride as a passing game in those brief moments, Green Bay and Minnesota, that was what we leaned on, and that was where we got some of our biggest success. So that's going to be a route he immediately does well on. And Brian Daboll said after the draft during his pre-draft presser, I'm trying to get this exact quote up. We have so much in this doc that I'm going to have trouble finding this in the moment right now. But he said that, I'm going to paraphrase, but I'll find it later. He said essentially, Jalen Hyatt runs the routes that we like. Like he believes that, a lot of people are using this transition from Josh Heupel's system as a negative for Jalen Hyatt coming to Giants. It weirdly might be a positive, because like of what Brian Daboll just said, which is that, he believes that the routes that he runs, and deep over is one of them for sure, that he likes that, translates well to what the Giants do. And I'll say this, Nick, just as an overall thought, throughout my lifetime, this hasn't always been the case. I would say even more times than not, it was the opposite. But for the first time, I really do feel confident that this type of pick, the coaching staff we have in place with Daboll and Groh and Kafka, can maximize a talent like this and can unlock a talent like this. Versus in the past, when we had these types of guys come in, dating all the way back to like Sonoris Moss, a pick I hated at the time, we traded up for. Like this is a deep dig, right? That's a deep dive. Sonoris Moss, Jernigan, all those types of guys that similar profiles, really just from a speed standpoint, from an explosiveness standpoint, and a lot of question marks in both of those games outside of their speed. The coaching staff's never really developed those players, and they ended up being busts. But I have a lot of confidence that this coaching staff can develop this player.
I'm right there with you. And side note, Sonoris Moss acknowledged me before a game one time. I never went to Giants games growing up, and I screamed his name during pre-game warmups, and he actually looked up and gave me a little wave, and I was like, nice, Sonoris Moss. But he never really performed on the field, which is unfortunate. But I'll say this, man, about Jalen Hyatt in general. I think you're certainly onto something in terms of this Giants coaching staff being able to develop him and get the most out of him. And this was also mentioned during the press conference. Josh Heupel used to coach on the staff at what was it? I always forget, at Gabe Davis' school. UCF. One of those directional UCF. Yes. Josh Heupel used to coach on the staff at UCF, and he goes way back with Joe Schoen. So Joe Schoen knows him very well. They have a good relationship. And that was one of the reasons why he wanted Gabe Davis. And Brian Daboll wanted Gabe Davis as well. And Gabe Davis is a completely different type of wide receiver than Jalen Hyatt. But when you're talking about that type of system, Jalen Hyatt's skill set fits much better than Gabe Davis's. And that to me can be translatable into this offense because those deep over routes, play action. If you go through the first, 13 weeks of the season, like up until the bye week and a little bit past that, the Giants ranked in like the top 5 in play action efficiency. It might have been the top 7, but they were one of the most efficient passing attacks off play action. And that was without a deep threat. Now you open up the deep threat. You're talking about the middle of the field being open for Darren Waller. And another thing, you're going to have a lot of these defenses playing a little bit more middle of the field open. Safeties aren't going to be crowding around the box.
Right.
What's going to happen if Daniel Jones doesn't love what he sees? He's going to use his legs a little bit more. I just feel like this adds a completely different attack for Mike Kafka and Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll to really just take advantage of defenses. And it's not just going to help the explosive nature of this passing attack. It's also going to help the running game. It's going to help Daniel Jones and his legs. It's going to help the short to intermediate passing attack. It's going to help a lot. So I'm glad they ended up getting this field stretcher in the draft.
And one thing that is hard to quantify, Nick, though we have some stats to quantify it, is what Joe Schoen said is like for their stopwatches, and in addition to the stopwatches, what they see on the game film, and I know you agree with this, it backs it up. He's really a 4-3 guy. He tested 4.40 flat, Jalen Hyatt, but they view him as a pure 4-3 guy. And I think you can watch him on tape, especially on the vertical plane and on those deep overs. And he does look like he's a tick faster than your typical 4-4 guy. And I thought it was really interesting to hear what he said about how he's working on playing at a different weight than he played at the collegiate level. He played around 175, 176, Jalen Hyatt said, and now he's going to want to play around 190. He said he's up to about 188. His goal is to get to 190. That's what he hopes to play at for the NFL season. So you know that he understands that play strength was an issue in his game, and it's something that he can work on. He's training. He's trying to get stronger. He's trying to get bigger. And I'm not usually the biggest fan of adding weight. I've said this through the years from fantasy football podcasts, but more so that is the case for me at running back than wide receiver, I would say, specifically running back. So I think for his specific profile, this is a good thing.
I also think this is a great landing spot for Jalen Hyatt, not just because of the coaching staff. You have Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka, Mike Rowe. Those are 3 very experienced, smart, progressive coaches who can get the most out of you, as we've been saying for the last couple minutes. But also, he doesn't have to be the starter. He doesn't have to bear the burden of expectations in year 1, right? Like, of course, if he's not being used at all, we're going to start talking about it. But you have Paris Campbell, who's on a 1-year deal. You have Isaiah Hodgins, who's on a 1-year deal. You have a lot of these veteran players who are here for 1 year. You can use Jalen Hyatt in a more situational type of role to stretch the field off of play action, things like that. And he doesn't have to play 60 snaps in a game. And then you can develop him in terms of the nuances of running routes. And you can develop him in terms of, hey, look, the windows here in the NFL are not going to be as wide open as they were in Tennessee. And he can get used to the speed of the game. You know, he has a lot of speed, but he can get used to the speed of the game without having to be a full-time starter. And then once he's ready, he can assume that role, which could help his confidence out, just because the Giants are very deep at wide receiver, at least in 2023. So I also like that for his long-term development. Ideally, he's going to play in year 1, right? And I'm sure he will have a role in year 1, but he doesn't have to play if he's not ready.
That's a great point too. And that's for a prospect like this, where, you know, there is just concern coming from that, you know, Art Briles, Josh Heupel style offense, and concern with what you already see on tape as far as didn't play much against press, played a lot in the slot, though he says he can play outside and in the slot. We'll see. That's a confident thing by him, but we'll see. Obviously, what I said too before, the play strength, which I do think is an issue in the after the catch. But I think you may have a good point about the after the catch. He really wasn't given that many opportunities to really showcase what he can do after the catch. So we'll kind of see if that was the reason for it, or if just simply put, he's more of a linear athlete.
Yeah. One thing about the play strength too, because I am right there with you in terms of him running routes, more physical cornerbacks, which he's going to see in the NFL. They can bump him off a little bit, especially when it's, you know, you'll be right up breathing in each other's face in press coverage. But this guy was a freaking dog kind of as a blocker at Tennessee. Like, Heupel would align him in the backfield sometimes, and then he would do creative things off the play action in that. But there were times where he was tasked to block 240-pound edges and 240-pound linebackers and things like that. And yeah, I'm not saying that he dominated the point of attack, but he had the mentality to go into that blocking point and be like, I'm not going to let you bitch me around. And I appreciated that about his game. It was one of my little notes that I had in the scouting report over at Giants Country. I was like, this guy's a competitive blocker, and he typically does not fit the mold of what you would expect a competitive blocker to be. That would be Cedric Tillman, who was also a competitive blocker. But Josh Heupel designed plays where he would throw screens to Cedric Tillman and have Jalen Hyatt blocking for him. So it's like, Josh Heupel and that coaching staff trusted him to do that. It speaks to something about his overall toughness.
I like that. So would you say if they took an X-ray of Jalen Hyatt, you would see that you would see a dog in it?
Oh yeah, you'd see a bulldog in it too, just because I love bulldogs. But now I gotta hate bulldogs because the Eagles have them all. It's freaking sickening.
So corny by me, but I had to do it. Jalen Hyatt said that Daniel Jones has already texted him, and I liked his quote that Jalen Hyatt said. I mean, I am the biggest sucker, Nick, for these kinds of quotes. I don't know what it is. I'll just auto buy in when you say stuff like this. But he said, once I get up there, the first thing I'm going to do, this is what Jalen Hyatt said about Daniel Jones. The first thing I'm going to do is meet with him so I can understand what he does, what he likes when he sees in games, what his best throws are, and what he wants me to do for him. I think when you build that kind of connection with a quarterback, you can go as far as you want to. Like I said, I'm going to be consistent. I want to be consistent in the facility and in meeting with Daniel Jones and doing what he wants me to do for him, because that's my objective. I'm here to help him out. And look, that's as good as it gets, quote wise. Like that's saying the right thing right there.
You got a South Carolina guy and Jalen Hyatt speaking like that to a North Carolina guy in Daniel Jones. Love it.
Yeah. And just another fun note about this Hyatt thing. According to Shane, it was actually Brian Deal who kind of pushed banged the table for Jalen Hyatt. This is who he really wanted, Daboll. And like I mentioned before, Daboll said there's routes that he's seen him run on film that translate perfectly to what the Giants run in their system. And in addition to that, he actually was the one who sent the text out to Sean McVay, apparently, Brian Daboll. And that kind of got the deal started here. So I thought that was really interesting as well. Again, this is an interesting pick from the Giants standpoint. I feel like at 73, it was really good value. A couple other things I wanted to bring up about this pick before we turn to Michael Schmitz. And again, we'll bounce all around. But Matt Harmon, who we've had on the podcast before, the creator of Reception Perception, works for Yahoo Sports. Just to remind you, if you didn't hear that podcast, it was like 2 years ago. Reception Perception is his idea, which is a pretty cool one, where he watches every single route of every single receiver and charts them based on how often they get open on each route. So he just cares if they win the route, not if A, the ball comes to them, and not if B, the ball was thrown errantly, either behind them, ahead of, up top of, over them, below them, whatever. He's just charting, do they win their routes? And he said that Jalen Hyatt had the best route success rate on the 9 route, which is the vertical route, the go route, by a mile of anyone in this class. And that speaks to what you said before, right? How there is one trait that he does really well, but sometimes you should be focusing in. And somebody told me this when it comes to scouting, Nick, and I don't know what your take is on this, but you can probably tell me after this. But someone told me once when it comes to scouting, the good scouts, the ones who really do this well, focus on if that player, if that prospect has a defining trait. Does he have something that could work at the NFL level? And less focus on what does he do wrong? Oh, he dropped some passes. His drop rate was high. Things that, and drops is probably one that I shouldn't be underselling, especially with Giants fans. But other things that you're focusing on, like for DK Metcalf, he ran a bad 3-cone, right?
Yeah.
All that type of idea, that mindset. And so this guy has that. And in addition to that, Harmon also said from his film study, his other notes were that he tracks the deep ball well, which we obviously agree with. That's part of why he's such a good vertical route runner. And he just said he needs to develop more as a route runner because he played in that wacky college system. But he said he adds much needed juice for the Giants, and he sees as a good pick. So he had, just to give you an overview of his route chart, according to Success by Route in 2022 per Matt Harmon's game charting, he actually had red across the board except for the 9 route, the flat route, and the screen game. So not obviously the perfect profile from that standpoint, but he also ran the most percentage of his routes was actually the 9 route. The 9 route and the dig and the curl were the highest percentage of his routes. So curls, 9 routes, digs. I think the digs is kind of they're grouping in like deep overs. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think it's more just deep overs there being grouped in there. So, most of what he ran was deep overs and 9 routes with some curls, which you would expect from this type of profile. But he did get green, but he didn't get green success rate in digs or the curls, actually. So according to Matt Harmon, this is another aspect of his game he needs to work on. While he has run those deep overs, it's something that he didn't chart him to have as much success with. The 9 route, though, of course, was a ton of success, and the flat routes he had a lot of success on too.
I feel like when Jalen Hyatt had success with the digs, it was success though, right? Like he was taking it to the house. Like if you watch the Missouri game, that was one of the plays. I can't remember exactly what quarter it was in, but the play against Missouri where he's aligned like by the numbers and he's the number 2 receiver and he ate into the cushion of the defender who was like 12 yards off of him anyways, got him turned around and then ran a deep post. And the ball tracking ability on that play was phenomenal. It was against Missouri. He got tackled, I think, near the goal line on that play. I don't think it was a touchdown, but we spoke on the ball tracking. And that's one of the reasons why, like, I hear the one trick pony thing, and I get it because he is a speed. He's coming from an unconventional offense. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that. But when you have the ball skills, and normally every wide receiver you would imagine has that. But we talked about Quentin Johnston, not exactly the guy that you would think would be a body catcher with that type of contested catch profile, but he is. He's a body catcher. Jalen Hyatt can pluck away from his frame with his little 9-inch hands.
Yes.
So, and that Missouri game was the one game that really stuck out to me on tape of him doing that. And the tracking ability is there too. So he can track it. He can concentrate. He can contort his body, I would say, adequately enough to make the catch. But again, it's not even like he had like a ton of contested catch situations because he was burning past a lot of players. And that's a testament to his skill set. But it also is, to be fair, a part of that offensive philosophy. Mm-hmm. It's just the offense sets him up like that because it really stresses the defense to cover people like that when you have that much speed. If you hesitate for a split second against that offense when they're always going into the mesh point where you got to think like, oh, are they running the football? By the time you realize Hendon Hooker did not put the football into the belly of the running back, Jalen Hyatt's way past you because he's so damn fast.
True. And you saw that a lot with exactly what you just said, with the way they ran that offense. The ball was out too. Hooker got that ball out fast. And I love how Mark Ross described it on NFL Network. He had just, I'm forgetting now how he described it. And I shouldn't even bring up Mark Ross. It brings up bad memories for Giants fans. But I did like how he described the way he throws his deep ball. It goes up and it comes down. And I feel like that's a really good way to describe it versus like a guy like Levis, who when he threw his deep ball, I felt like it was just not going up and coming down to the wide receiver. It's just going in a lot of places and hanging up there a lot. But anyway, back to this. Something interesting. He had a top speed, Nick, of 24.29 miles per hour at the combine. That was third fastest of 208 players overall at the combine at any position. And that's interesting because it didn't show up in his testing on the 40 time. And I think at some point in the future, we're going to get to the point where finally next gen stats is accepted and shared and every team has it. We're going to finally have an ability to kind of track how these guys are from the next gen standpoint instead of just like the 40-yard dash, because he may not be the best technician when it comes to running the 40-yard dash. There's a lot of people who don't have the technique down with running the 40-yard dash, which means literally nothing at the NFL level. So when I see that he actually has top speed like that, third fastest, I feel like that means a lot more. Obviously average 18.9 yards per catch in 2022. Less interested in that one, Nick, because that's coming from that fake Tennessee off. It's just like, you have to really consider those things, obviously. Josh Norris compared him to Ted Ginn Jr., which I think is not a bad comp, honestly, and it's not such a bad thing. Ginn played a lot in the NFL. Remember, this is 73rd round pick, right? 73rd overall pick, 73rd round pick. That'd be wild. 73 rounds of the NFL draft. Can you imagine that?
I think I'd be drafted at that point.
Yeah, I think I'd just be dead from just being too tired. But anyway, 73rd overall pick. It's like you shouldn't be viewing him in the prism of like anyone you would take in the top 20 or top 25. This is so much further in the draft. So a Ted Ginn would not be the worst comp. PFF comps and Johnny Knox, obviously that one wouldn't be as good. You don't want that. There's some Will Fuller comps out there. I saw someone compare him to Joey Galloway, which I think is a little bit too egregious there. But as far as like his style, his game, you and I were both, I was thinking about this, Nick, when we were preparing for this pod. You and I were both really, really high on the game film we watched of Josh Palmer a few years ago, another Tennessee wide receiver. And one of the main reasons why we were so high was his ball tracking ability, which is like one of the most underrated traits in the NFL for a wide receiver. And we would have loved him in round 3. And honestly, I feel like Hyatt is a much higher ceiling prospect than Palmer is, to be completely honest. He's not as big as Palmer, but he has more vertical speed in my mind. He's a better they're both really good ball trackers, but he's more vertical speed and more suddenness, and he's a better athlete, in my opinion, overall. I think he had another thing underrated about Hyatt's game is he had 40-inch vertical jump, which is super explosive, and a super explosive broad jump as well. So I just feel like if I'm going to get excited about Josh Palmer, I really should be excited about Jalen Hyatt in this area of the draft, even though obviously we had the podcast where we said we weren't as high on Hyatt as other draft analysts, but that's in relation to the 25th overall pick, not the 73rd.
Of course, this is excellent value. And when we were going through the mock draft scenarios, when Jalen Hyatt was not in the first round, we were like, hey, at 57, should we go Jalen Hyatt? And then I think he fell to the third round in one of our scenarios, and one of us ended up selecting him. I think I selected him in one of those scenarios.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is great value in round 3. And here we are. Giants traded up to
Michael Schmitz in round 2 also, didn't you?
I think I did. Yeah,
I mean, we have it out there. It's a dueling 7-round mock. Somebody go back and look it up for us. Because if you did, then we combined to get all the picks right so far. Because I got Deonte Banks in the first round in my mock, and then you got Michael Schmitz in your round, second round, and then if you hit Hyatt too, we nailed them all.
Yeah, I did hit Hyatt in one of those. I'm not exactly sure which one. And this was also all 3 of these players the Giants were interested in. They had top 30 visits with all but JMS, but they were with JMS at his pro day. They took him out to dinner the night before his pro day, and they had a bunch of stuff with him during his pro day. And the love between Bobby Johnson and Michael Schmitz, that was well known around the NFL. And I'm glad that the Giants were able to secure him. But with Jalen Hyatt and Deonte Banks specifically, and it's the complete antithesis of Michael Schmitz, who was at Minnesota for 6 freaking years, like Van Wilder over there. Those guys were only 1-year wonders. Like Deonte Banks, more so because of injury, because in 2021 he had the shoulder injury that prevented him from playing. But with Jalen Hyatt, he did not do a lot in 2020 when he was a true freshman. Again, this is a 4-star recruit. It's not like Tennessee at that time was recruiting and just landing 4-star after 4-star after 4-star, right? They're not like an Alabama or a Georgia. 4-star, it's a pretty solid recruit. Didn't really do much in 2020 or 2021. And then in 2022, he was probably the focal point of the offense only because Cedric Tillman went down. Now, you can't take anything away from Jalen Hyatt. He rose to the occasion. He deserves all of the accolades that he is receiving for his north of 1,200 yard, 15 touchdown season. Again, 5 touchdowns, over 200 yards against the Nick Saban coach defense. Can't take any of that away from him, but I do feel like it is at least a fair question, specifically when you're referring to him in the top 25, top 30 picks of, hey man, why were you only productive in 2022, right? But it doesn't matter really, because at this point of the draft, at 73, I'll take you if you had one really good year and you can run that fast and it all pops up on film, even if your profile is not complete. This is a very, very good investment in my opinion.
Yeah, not only is it a good investment in our mind, but it's also in their mind an amazing investment because, like I mentioned before, when they picked Michael Schmitz at 57, Jalen Hyatt, they said, was in the mix. He was in the range for them. And then they also said, later in the draft, Joe Schoen said, on part of the logic behind trading up, he said he was just the kind of player that was sticking out on our board at the time. So when that 73rd, 72nd pick range started to fall, and they're still 17, 16 picks away, they have one guy on their board, Jalen Hyatt, so much higher than everyone else, similar to what they had with Michael Schmitz. But I think it was even more pronounced because they didn't trade up for Michael Schmitz. They let it fall, and they were going to be like, somebody takes JMS, whatever, we'll get something else here, obviously. But with Jalen Hyatt, they couldn't take that risk because he was so much higher on their board. And it makes me think, he said, Joe Schoen said this, Nick, and this is a transition, and this kind of factors in what the Giants did on day 1 and now on day 2 by adding Deonte Banks, who ran a 4.35, and Jalen Hyatt, who ran a 4.40, but again, looks much faster on film. And according to Joe Schoen, they have him as a 4.3 player. He said, I would say on both sides of the ball, team speed in general was a big focus for us this offseason on offense and defense and special teams. And we did some of that already with Paris Campbell, Jeff Smith, who he mentioned, which I thought was interesting, Bobby Okereke. And those 3 guys do add speed. Darren Waller to some extent as well. And now to add Banks with that 4.35 and Jalen Hyatt, which would they consider a 4.3 athlete. The Giants have really done a good job adding speed. And what did we say a lot during last season? We said one of their biggest issues just in general was speed. They didn't have enough speed on offense. And you know what? He's right. They didn't really have enough speed on defense either, especially at linebacker. There just simply wasn't a lot of speed out there. And even at corner, right? Like Fabian Moreau, Nick McLeod, God bless them. They played really well. We got the most out of those dudes, but those dudes are not fast, especially Fabian Moreau. That was not a fast cornerback out there. So
I'll push back a little bit. I think
you liked his speed. I didn't love his speed.
It really stuck out to me against Carolina, which I think was his first time playing with the New York Giants. The Giants lose that game. They might not even make the playoffs if it wasn't for one individual effort from Fabian Moreau. And sometimes I get all into this where I'm like, well, this happened. And I'm like, Charlie Day from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I'm connecting dots and I'm like this. But remember the play when Christian McCaffrey hit the B gap and just exploded and he was gone. He was going to run for a touchdown. And then all you see is Fabian Moreau just tracking him down, man, like a maniac, and tackled him. And guess what happened? Carolina didn't score on that drive, and the Giants end up winning that football game. It's little plays like that are reasons why teams end up winning championships. Giants obviously didn't win a championship. They won a freaking playoff game against basically all odds, and nobody predicted them to do that. So I don't know. I feel like Fabian Moreau had solid speed, but he's not Deonte Banks level athlete. Deonte Banks, again, and same with Jalen Hyatt, over 40-inch verts, bro. Over 11-foot broad jumps. You didn't see that often like 10 years ago. That wasn't like a thing where you have like 12 players at a specific position group all have like over 41-inch vertical.
Yeah, I know.
The Giants added 2 of them at wide receiver and cornerback, typically the positions that do that. So I'm excited about it. Yeah,
that was something Bucky Brooks said on a podcast recently. He's like, when did everybody start jumping 40 inches? It's kind of crazy. This used to never happen here, but apparently it's a thing now. And, it is what it is there. Let's see a few other things here. Okay. One thing I wanted to talk about, we can transition now a little bit to John Michael Schmitz. We can get back to some more on Hyatt if we
need. Should I do my scouting report on Hyatt?
Yeah, we can do that now.
Okay. I'll read the scouting. You want me to do strength, weakness, synopsis again?
Yep.
Alrighty. Jalen Hyatt, Tennessee wide receiver. Elite difference-making speed and explosiveness. Elite acceleration. Runs like a gazelle. Hyatt is tailor-made for creating explosive plays. Steps on cornerbacks' toes in the blink of an eye off the vertical release. Speed forces off leverage. Solid overall ability to stop, to open up for comeback and curl routes. Did well to work into the blind spot to sell the vertical stem on those comeback and curl routes, which is a nuanced thing, by the way. Has displayed some deceptiveness up his vertical stem. Elite separation ability via athletic ability in man coverage. Very smooth on horizontal routes. Acceleration is maintained. Does have multiple gears. Calls several DPI, defensive holding penalties. He strikes fear into defensive backs. Has good hands. Plucks the ball out of the air effortlessly. Excellent competitor. Will block. Josh Heupel was not afraid to use him in condensed splits to block in short yardage situations. Defense will have to play his offense differently with him on the field. Rose to the occasion against top competition. Scored 5 touchdowns against the Nick Saban coach defense in that upset victory.
Love it. Now let's get to the concerns.
Concerns, lean player who is under 190 pounds. I wrote this before the combine. Very limited route tree, somewhat of a one-trick pony. For someone with his speed, I thought he would be a little bit more elusive. We discussed that already. Wasn't the smoothest in transition, in and out of breaks. 88% of his snaps from the slot throughout his college career. Didn't make many contested catches, has good hands, but didn't have many adjustments or contested catch situations. Again, maybe you don't use that against him, but it's something we have not really checked out on film. Physical corners who land press were able to alter his release. Rough drops against Mizzou and South Carolina. Had a ton of schemed releases and design touches. Will need to expand his release package, a one-year wonder.
Yep, and I think we've gone over those extensively as well, and I think those are all fair critiques as well. That you can throw out the synopsis on Hyatt.
Jalen Hyatt is an elite athlete who is an excellent vertical threat and an explosive playmaking talent. The 2022 Biletnikoff Award winner combines elite separation skills with excellent competitive toughness as a blocker. He's not the most complete wide receiver. There are areas of improvement, and he's not the biggest guy in the world. Despite those facts, his elite speed is so difference-making that his draft slot will likely be in the first round. It was not. The NFL is predicated on creating explosive plays, and Hyatt will be able to do that in the NFL. His field stretching ability will force defenses to play a team in a specific manner, which could open up several opportunities for his offense in other areas. I don't think he's a pure one-trick pony, but he's not complete as a receiver. Still, the one trick that people do associate with him, he does possess, and it's so impactful that it can foundationally change the offense that decides to select him.
And it can foundationally change a game, right? Like that Alabama game with Joe Schoen showed up to and watched himself. Jalen Hyatt was the best player on the field, right? Like by far. He had 5 touchdowns, over 200 yards, completely changed that game and won that game for Tennessee.
6 catches too. Like
right,
it wasn't
6 catches. Yeah.
Just crazy.
And some of those releases, man, are just like free. It is what it is. Like with Jalen Hyatt, it is like a fake offense. It feels very fake, but I like that Joe Schoen's friends with Josh Heupel because there is stuff to learn. Like get Joe Schoen. I would love Joe Schoen just set up a little like dinner date with at Brian Daboll's favorite steakhouse between Daboll and Heupel, just so Daboll can pick Heupel's brain and like incorporate some of that stuff. It's not going to work at the NFL level the same way with the spacing and the hash marks and where they line up, but you can find something from what Heupel does because that dude is just tearing it up from a schematic standpoint at the collegiate level.
Dan, you're a steak guy. What type of steak do you think Brian Daboll prefers? What's his favorite?
I'm thinking, what's that one? The cowboy, not the cowboy. It's called either like the tomahawk or the cowboy. It's like a porterhouse and a ribeye, like on the same thing. You know that one? It's like the same. Someone can do it better. I can't believe neither of us know this. It's like you get a porterhouse and a ribeye. It's one steak though.
Okay, well that
Yeah.
sounds pretty sweet. I was going to go with a nice rare Delmonico.
Okay.
Yeah.
I could see it. I mean, he's a rare would be. I don't know if he's a rare guy. Medium rare is
medium rare.
More. Yeah, rare is. I've always wanted to, but I've never had the balls to order a steak rare. But I have wanted to.
I thought you were a rare guy.
No, rare, crazy. Rare is a little intense. Rare is like red, and some people cook rare like cold in the middle. You've seen what?
I've seen you eat steak, and I'm like, bro, that thing's still alive. It still has a heartbeat.
That's only medium rare. You consider that.
Okay.
So this is a good point. So I cook. You've seen me eat a cooked steak. So I cook it a certain way that you can't really order at a restaurant. It's between medium rare and rare, so it is technically a little red. Not as red as you're making it out to be, though. By the way, it's definitely not like it's not. But it's not never cold in the middle. That's like I think like rare is like cold in the middle type of thing, which I've never actually had, but I've kind of always wanted to try. At some point, I'm going to do it at a really good steakhouse.
Dude, it was so red you can call it Joseph Stalin, man. Like, legit.
In your mind, it was red. In my mind, it was like, yeah, this is good, and I could even probably go a little bit redder. But one thing you'll never see me do is medium, or of course not medium well, or well. Yeah. I mean, that's just what are you paying all that money for? What the hell is going on here?
Eat leather.
So I will say this: there's a place Al-Aqsa in Boonton, New Jersey, that I eat at because it's near the Boonton South Boonton Field Club that I am a member of. And shout out to Al-Aqsa. It's a Palestinian restaurant, which a lot of people listening will probably be surprised to hear as a Jew that going to a Palestinian restaurant. And I give this guy insane business. I'm going at least once a week at this point. And we go and I bring like everyone. It's like a 10 meal order and we're just crushing it for this dude. But great restaurant. He makes great food. And he makes his best dish to me is the lamb chops. And I learned this from my friend who's Arab. And I didn't know this. Shout out Frankie Bagels. Speaking of my Arab friend, Frankie Bagels, I can now bring this in. I'm currently wearing Church Street Bagels. Check out this place, Church Street Bagels in Denville. It's right across from the pasta shop. This is Frankie Bagels'. I call him Frankie Bagels because he owns this bagel shop. And let me tell you something. This dude makes the best freaking breakfast sandwich you can have. He has some tricks. There was something that I think all breakfast sandwiches have on it. Fried potatoes. That's a real nice trick. You should have it on all breakfast sandwich. But, man, this dude gives you whatever you want there. His salads are surprisingly unbelievable. He's got some really interesting things on the menu. Check out Church Street Bagels. It's a shout out. I don't care. This is like the great. He's like, Nick, there's people you meet in life that become your like friends super fast. And like you get to a point where you're like, how did this person become someone I want to hang out with so much? And it's like that good of a friend in such a short period of time. That's this kind of guy. Everyone wants to be around this guy. He walks in a room, it's infectious. So check out his bagel shop. I promise you the food's as good as the owner who runs that place. But anyway, the point is he's Arab and he told me that you can get what'd you have there?
I was just going to strategically put the ads right after.
Yeah, it's a perfect time. We should be. They should be advertising us. But the point I'm trying to make, we need to wrap this up. We can get back to Giants football. The point I'm trying to make right now is he's Arab, and he told me that Arab places cook meat well done. So I order their lamb chops from Al-Aqsa. It's their best dish, and it comes well done, but it's seasoned so freaking well that these lamb chops are fucking amazing. I'm sorry to curse. These lamb chops are unreal good, and yet they're well done. Like normally I eat my lamb pink, like I like it rare, but this is not rare lamb and it's still freaking amazing. He's gotten me on a few other things too, by the way. I may be like getting off pork for life. There's some things that I don't like about eating pork. I don't know if I could ever give up bacon. That's the problem, but like I'm trying to cut down it. But anyway, back to this. What were we even saying? There was a huge tangent about Brian Daboll taking Josh Heupel out to a steakhouse so he can learn some of those concepts.
Yeah, so we can learn some of those concepts. I don't know how much of it would translate to the NFL, but we can transition. We can transition a little bit to John Michael Schmitz here. Anybody who listens to this podcast knows that I'm a fan of John Michael Schmitz. He was my center one. I had him over Joe Tippmann. I do think Joe Tippmann, maybe his overall athletic profile might translate a little bit better to the New York Giants, but I don't think John Michael Schmitz is limited in any fashion. I just think Joe Tippmann, this guy was like a top 40 graded player on Bruce Feldman's ranked player, I should say, on Bruce Feldman's freak list. Like he has incredible ability to pull out and get out into space on power gap concepts. I think John Michael pull out.
Incredible ability to pull out.
Incredible ability to pull out. Oh man, someone please cut that up. That is gold right there. I love that, dude. That is freaking gold right there. John Michael Schmitz, he can also pull out. They ran a lot of outside zone, but they ran a pretty diverse rushing attack, I would say, at Minnesota. They're more of a run-heavy type of approach rather than a pass-happy type of offense. They ran a lot of RPO as well. And when John Michael Schmitz was in space, whether that be off of duo, inside zone, climbing up to the second level, I felt like his movement was plenty sufficient, right? Like he will be operational and functional as a moving type of center at the next level. He just doesn't have the high-end type of athletic ability that, let's say, a Joe Tippmann has. Now he's in the New York Jets, and I'm sure that Jet and Giant fans will be talking for a while about Joe Tippmann and John Michael Schmitz. I'll say this from a technical standpoint with John Michael Schmitz, and I'll get into my scouting report on him a little bit later. From a technical standpoint, he is much cleaner than Joe Tippmann in terms of his feet, in terms of his hands, and in terms of just kind of there's no really glaring warts in his profile. Yeah, he'll lose a play every now and again. That's going to happen sometimes. You can single out one play for anybody and say, look, he lost here. But in terms of consistency, and I've watched a lot of tape on this guy through the process, he's damn consistent, and he's a good football player. So I think the Giants got a really good center, and they haven't had one since really Weston Richburg, who spent much of his career injured with the New York Giants, knocking on wood.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. From a game film standpoint, John Michael Schmitz was by far and away the best center in this draft. He wasn't the first center drafted in this class because part of it is you got to make a projection at the NFL level. You have to, if you're a GM, you have to factor in age. Obviously, John Michael Schmitz is 24 years old, and you have to factor in what you mentioned, which is athleticism, because again, blocking these Big Ten IDLs is just such a different experience than blocking NFL linemen. And it's impossible to know if that game film will translate or not. But I like making the bet on the guy with better game film. I'm fine making the bet on the guy with better game film. Like everyone who listens to this podcast knows I would have preferred Tippmann, and the NFL preferred him too, or at least the Jets did. And we'll see what happens there, because the last time this happened, the Giants won 2020 when it was Andrew Thomas versus Mekhi Becton. Now, part of that is injuries. Mekhi Becton's had a lot of injuries, which is unfortunate, and it's part of the game. But the Giants won that one. And I think the Giants have a good chance to win this one too. John Michael Schmitz is the center one in this class. He would be my center one too. He wouldn't be the center one I draft first, though, despite him being the center one. And I think he has the highest floor. And I think that's why he is the center one. And I think he has the best film. And I think that's why he is the center one. I just tend to lean a little bit more at the center position on athleticism, because I just think it's one of those positions that projection is incredibly important, because there's a ton of guys who can do it pretty well. And then there's other guys who can just kind of in the middle of the pack. And then there's those guys who rise above the level, and they're usually the athletes or the super powerful guys like the Frank Ragnos. I'm not sure that John Michael Schmitz fits in either of those buckets. And I thought Tippmann might be able to fit into the bucket of super athleticism with honestly also incredible strength, because he is super powerful too. But again, I'm totally fine with banking on the film and banking on this guy's mentality too, because everything you read about John Michael Schmitz is really good. Now let's talk about some of these things. He spent 6 seasons at Minnesota. That's a lot, right? He had the redshirt year and he had the COVID year. So that's partially why that is why he's 24. He spent a lot of time. He had a weird process. We talked about one of the podcasts earlier, Nick, before the draft. We're like, there's going to be a lot of 24-year-old athletes in this class. You just got to take them, because it's a weird thing with the COVID. It's part of the thing. So the Giants kind of went away from a lot of the things they did, not only with the Deonte Banks pick and the Jalen Hyatt pick, but what they did in the first draft with Joe Schoen, right? In his first draft, you look at the RAS scores. The Giants are one of the teams that took some of the best, this is a weird way to say it, took the highest rate of high RAS athletes of almost any team last year's draft. And that was the case with Deonte Banks and Jalen Hyatt. Those are both super highly athletic prospects. But they also took young players last year. They focused on age. This John Michael Schmitz pick doesn't fit into the bucket of young age, young prospect. And he doesn't fit into the bucket of super athletic. He had an RAS score that was decent, but it wasn't super athletic. So they went a little bit away from it, and they focused more on the film, the fit, the person. I think a big factor in this is Bobby Johnson, to be honest with you. I just think he loves this dude, bang the table for this dude. I think Joe Schoen's that kind of GM that's just giving his coordinators and his position coaches the picks they want. I don't freaking hate that. Like, some people argue it's not the best way to draft because you can lose coaches and they can go to other teams. And I understand that. But right now we're looking for ways to make impacts on this team. And that's probably the fastest path.
I think with Joe Schoen, it comes down to this, and I know it's corny, and it's kind of become a joke, and I love that Lawrence Tynes incorporated it when he was on stage. Yeah. But I think for Joe Schoen, you need to be smart, tough, and dependable. You can have injury histories in the past, but you need to be those three things. And by dependable, that means you show up to work on time, like all of those things as well, right? Sure. I think those are foundational traits that Joe Schoen requires. but positional coaches love players and he liked them on film. I do think he's going to factor that in. And that is just a collaborative effort between the coaching staff and the front office. And with John Michael Schmitz, man, here's a quote from PJ Fleck, the head coach of the Minnesota Golden Gophers, talking about John Michael Schmitz, who was an All-American this past year. It also helps when your best player is your hardest worker. Like, you're talking about somebody who is going to be like the first guy in, last guy to leave, Daniel Jones type of mentality, which we know the Giants absolutely adore and really love. I think this coaching staff is going to fall in love with this kid. And according to Bobby Johnson, and just from what I hear from people who are more plugged in than I am, he's really smart. He's a very cerebral center. And I think that's vital, man. That's the part that's kind of hard to interpret on film. Like, you can talk about technique. You can talk about blocks that they can do, blocks that they can't do, wins and losses. It's kind of difficult to really locate and pinpoint what they're being told and how they are executing. But everybody raves about this guy's intelligence, his football IQ. And I think that's something that the Giants are going to need in this system, because John Feliciano came from Buffalo last year. He knew this system very well, and now he is gone. And maybe Ben Bredesen could have slid in, but I'm not ruling out Ben Bredesen for left guard right now because we don't know what's going on with Josh Azudu. So now you got that center, and now you just have right guard for a long-termer, and hopefully Josh Azudu can be your left guard for a long-termer. Maybe Ben Bredesen if they re-sign him, because I think Ben Bredesen has a little bit of upside. I think he's a solid overall NFL player, or at least a swing backup interior offensive lineman. But landing a guy like John Michael Schmitz who's going to work his ass off, who played in 57 career games, started 35, and then was an All-American this past year, that's a very solid move. And I'll say one more thing, Dan, and I know I'm going on for a little bit here, but the athletic ability and age, I just don't think that matters that much for the offensive line. I just don't really, not that much. Specifically the athletic ability. I know the short shuttle, that's something that I think you can discuss. And when you have a really high short shuttle, you really factor that in. But I don't think it's as big of a deal with your 40 at all. Like, your 10-yard split, maybe you can say a little bit, but not really. Like, who's running 40 yards on the offensive
40
line?
definitely not. Yeah.
Explosive, maybe you can say that, but the film doesn't show someone who is a bad athlete at all. So I don't care as much about that. Now, if you are a 20-year-old offensive lineman, maybe you would grow into your body a little bit more. But in terms of John Michael Schmitz, he's filled out. I don't think he's the biggest guy in the world, but he's dense. Like, he has a nice frame. Like, you look at him.
He showed up to the combine lighter than expected. He was listed at 320 by Minnesota, but only in the mid three. I think 304 was what he showed up at.
He was only 301 at the combine, which surprised the hell out of me, because when you look at him, it's like, that guy's dense. That guy's big, right? Like, he's a big freaking dude. He showed up at 301, but I feel like he's got a good freaking frame on him. He carries his weight well. He's a strong player at the point of attack. I wouldn't say he's overly dominating. Like, he's not like a complete road grader, but he can push the pile pretty well. So overall, man, I'm happy the Giants got their center, and I still think they need to invest in the interior offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, that's what has me most excited about this pick, just that they now have some flexibility out there with Ben Bredesen, who can kick back to guard, and they need depth at guard. Now they have one less hole there. They really needed offensive line, right? They needed interior offensive line more than anything else, in my opinion, as we got to day 2, because of what Dallas and Philadelphia did. It just became a big need. And because we are both believers in building through the trenches and trying to create some kind of, at some point, we could have a quarterback for the Giants that has a great O-line, right? Like, we want to be the Eagles. We want to be this team. And they took another offensive lineman in this draft, who I like, by the way. I came onto him late in the process. But Steen, like, you watch him move, and you're like, this dude can freaking move. And they'll convert his ass to interior. I know how they do these things, the Eagles. And because he can move the way he can move, he's going to be a hit there with Stoutland. It's just going to work. He has got power and movement skills. So I like Steen, unfortunately for us. But whatever. But we got to start making these types of picks in rounds 2 like they do, if we want to find a way to have him meet at some point an elite offensive line. And so John Michael Schmitz will hopefully be the guy that does that. Last season, he allowed just 5 pressures on 317 pass blocking snaps, earned the 92.3 grade from Pro Football Focus overall, which was the best grade by far for their centers. His run blocking grade was 92.4, his zone grade 91.5, his gap grade 80.6. So better zone blocker last year than gap blocker, but overall one of the best run blockers. I think the best run blocker at center. I mentioned the athleticism wasn't quite there. Vertical jump 29.5 inches, not what you want to see. Broad jump 8.8, not what you want to see either. The short shuttle 4.56 was actually pretty good, though. And you mentioned before, the short shuttle is probably the most important drill for an offensive lineman. A lot of people think it's the only drill that matters, though. It is interesting how, what's his name, had a 23.5-inch vertical, Cyrus Torrance, and then like fell completely out of this draft to like the end of back end of round 2 to the Bills, because, you know, like, I don't know if teams think he can move at the NFL level. We'll see. I still think it was a good pick for the Bills, but we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I'm not going to complain about this John Michael Schmitz pick. I said I wanted him in round 2. We got him in round 2. And I really do feel confident that we need someone like this who has all those starts, like you said, under his belt, really good game film, really good leader. It's just, do we have to worry about the age? I don't think that's as big of a factor. Do you worry about the athleticism? That to me is a little more of a factor. And it's not that I don't think he's a good athlete. It's that I feel like all the centers who are just difference makers at the NFL level are either really great athletes or super powerful at the point of attack. I'm just not so sure he's either of those two things, but that doesn't mean he can't be a 10-year starter and a borderline fringe Pro Bowler. It just means I don't think he can be an all-pro center. And that's fine. He's the second center draft in the class. You want to hopefully get something that can potentially be all-pro. I just don't know if it's there, and that's okay, though.
I don't think anything you said is unfair because I don't think he's a top-end athlete. And I love John Michael Schmitz. I don't think he's a top-end athlete at the position, nor do I think he is going to be a top 5 strongest center either in the league. But I do think this is somebody who understands leverage, did have a wrestling background, knows how to use his hands, and he has damn good footwork. And when you have those things down, I still think you have somewhat of a ceiling. I don't know if all pro is in the cards, but all pro doesn't really necessarily need to be in the cards. If he is a 10-year starter on this team who is not a liability, who shows up, sets the tone, knows how to set protections, helps Daniel Jones with that eventually. Everybody on the offensive line kind of looks to him because I've heard offensive linemen say in the past, you need a center who knows what the hell he's doing. You need a center. I think I heard Sean O'Hara recently on a podcast take shots at tackles for being dum-dums, and I just kind of laughed. It was obviously in jest, and it was funny, but you need a smart center and somebody who is going to be a tone setter, not just from the standpoint of dominating people and finishing aggressively with the competitive toughness that you desire in an interior offensive lineman, but also doing the right thing. That's important too. So I think John Michael Schmitz can do both of those things. And even though he might not be an all-pro guy, and he still could be.
I'm very excited about this pick. And a lot of that, yes, is because of the position that he plays. I'll be honest. It is. It's because of the film that he put out there, which is already great. It's because of what you said, the leadership. It's because of the smartness, which I'm about. Smartness is a stupid way to say it. It's because of the football intelligence. It's been a long few days. But the football intelligence, the football IQ, which I'm about to get to a few interesting quotes I thought that kind of, outline that. But all of those things, including, like I said, I want to start being the team that takes a lot of offensive linemen in these drafts, man. I just don't care. Like the Eagles keep doing it. And what do we see? We look at ourselves and we say, how the hell is this offensive line so elite? Now, yes, having Stoutland is a big part of that. It sucks. We don't have Stoutland. Like there's like 1 or 2 Stoutlands in the NFL. He's like, I don't even know who else is great these days besides Stoutland.
Like Callahan was really good.
Callahan. It's like
Munchak,
the others. Munchak, I think, is he coaching anymore? Or did he retire?
I'm not sure if he retired,
like
but Scarnecchia is retired now.
Scarnecchia retired. So that's part of it. But part of it is that they keep investing. They keep going back to the well, the Eagles, to draft offensive linemen. I want to be that team. I'd rather be a team that trades for an A.J. Brown if I need a receiver or something like that and gives up an occasional first-round pick, but continues to dip into day 2 on offensive line. Because I had this argument with someone on Twitter. They're dead wrong about it because I did the numbers on it when he was fired. Jerry Reese had 11 draft classes, and he did not take, I think he took, I don't have the numbers in front of me now, but go look up yourself, and you'll see how wrong you are, whoever you are who said this. Like, no, he took offensive linemen on day 2. They just didn't work. Wrong. He took offensive linemen on day 1 and day 3. He did not take offensive linemen on day 2. That's when he took the Jernigans, the Ramses Barton, Travis Beckham, Mario Manningham, receiver, D-back, receiver, linebacker. That's what he did on day 2. Very few picks. He took Weston Richburg once, and a few others. Like who?
Will Beatty
once, but that's 11 draft classes. That's 2 names. There might have been 1 or 2 more, but that's 2 and 11. I think there were 2 more that he took on day 2 or day 3. So I want to be a team that does it almost every draft, if not every draft. That's how you're going to get a great offensive line with the occasional, take the big swing on Evan Neal type of pick, which I'm also down for. But let's get into something that I thought stood out as far as John Michael Schmitz. And this is a kudos to Pat Leonard of the Daily News, who, takes a lot of heat with Giants fans. I think he's a rumor monger to some degree, but to be fair, he was kind of right on Kadarius Toney, and no one talks about it. But he was dead right on that. And he deserved.
He wasn't kind of right. He was dead right.
Dead right on the Kadarius Toney thing when everybody crushed him for that. And that's just classic Giants fans on Twitter. They'll just crush you if you say anything negative at all about the franchise. You can't even say a lick of negativity about this team. Everything is the greatest thing ever. But he was right, and you guys killed him for that. But I thought, aside from that, he had a really great article that came out like 2 days before the draft about John Michael Schmitz. And It was from John Michael Schmitz, current like coach and trainer, who is actually a former player on the Bills offensive line with Brian Daboll. And he had talked about the meeting they had, Bobby Johnson and John Michael Schmitz, at his pro day, and how they got to know him, and they went out to that dinner. And he told him that during that dinner, Bobby Johnson put him through the ringer as far as making calls, protections, right? Like he gave him the quiz of all quizzes. He even gave him a tackle call. He threw a tackle call at him to try to get him to miss something. And that's how, he said Bobby basically installed how they do all their protections. And these are the stuff that I have been installing with John Michael for 2 months. Cause this is Surly's who said this, his offensive line coach. Cause he says, and this is because Surly's, he threw a bunch at him where he couldn't take notes because they were at a restaurant. And here are installs. Look at it, install it. Let's eat dinner and chat. And here's your test. And he passed it with flying colors besides the one call that was the tackle call. And obviously you can't expect the center to make a tackle call. He was kind of just trying to, trip him up there. And within that, he said, I'm trying to find this exact quote, but I thought this was really interesting. This is from Surlis. He said that what I teach him comes a lot from what I learned with Brian Daboll in Buffalo. So I feel like he has a little bit of a leg up there when it comes to learning this offense because of what he's working on right now with Surlis. I thought that was super interesting, but it also just speaks mainly to what you were saying before, Nick, which is part of why they love this player, John Michael Schmitz, is because they feel like he's right there, ready to go day one from a mental standpoint. And that's really important for the center position.
It's very important for the center position. Sean O'Hara, I think it was on Schmelke's podcast I listened to whenever it came out like a week ago, because I saw Sean O'Hara was on it. I was like, oh man, I got to listen to that podcast. So I did, man. And he discussed the mental side of playing the offensive line. And Schmelke was asking him good questions about why some interior offensive linemen fail out in the NFL. And that's a big part of it if they can't comprehend the mental side of it, right? So when you look at a guy like John Michael Schmitz, who was accomplished, was an All-American, has all of this experience, is a little bit older, a little bit more mature, and also has that type of mentality where it's like, I'm going to show up with a lunch pail. I'm just going to get my damn job done. Like this dude's dad was a carpenter and his mom was an electrician. You want to talk about blue freaking collar, and he's from Illinois, like some nowhere town in Illinois. Right. Like this guy is a blue collar through and through, hardworking type of individual. And I really think the Giants are going to leverage that. And I think the Giants just got somebody, man. I'm glad. This is somebody that we all thought the Giants might get at 25. They got him in the second round. So you got Deonte Banks, him, and now you get Jalen Hyatt, another player who might have went with the Giants at 25 at some point, bro. Grand slam.
Right. Yeah. And this just, I found the exact quote now from Sirs. He says, the majority of the concepts I teach are what I learned from the Bills and the Vikings, because those are the two offenses I understood the best. So a lot of the conceptual football from the run game to how the protections are broken down is based off of those protections I ran specifically under Daboll. He said, what makes Daboll's system so complicated and intricate is it's all in code words. And one word means formation, play call, protection, route, concept, the whole bit. So he needs a guy that's smart enough to learn the offense and translate it over to code words. And that's what I've been teaching John Michael Schmitz. So this really feels like that's got to give the dude a leg up.
I would imagine. Yeah. I'm going to get into the strengths, weaknesses for homeboy.
Yeah, let's do it. I wanted to, let's talk about one thing real quick before you get into that. I think it's notable that Brian Daboll Joe Schoen has a relationship with Bill Parcells, who at one point said, and this is something that Pat Leonard brought up in that article I thought was really interesting. Parcells said centers are hard to find. You can't just dial 1-800 and find one. You got to find that position. Same thing happened when it came to Brandon Breen. Brandon Breen said, I was in Carolina for a while. We had Ryan Khalil, and he took a lot of pressure off the quarterback. You go back, the first guy extended here, Eric Wood, and then obviously he made the decision, whoever they signed for the four, I'm forgetting, Mitch Morse for the 4-year for it. So I think that this was a big thing for Joe Schoen. At some point, he really wanted to make this concerted effort to get the Giants a really good center. It's something we talked about a lot last year. We both are big believers that center, like off-ball linebacker, is actually a very underrated position at the NFL and makes a big difference on winning and losing.
And we also saw Joe Schoen in his press conference kind of express what seemed like a nervous nature and the fact that he had to be really patient to wait for John Michael Schmitz, right? Like he wanted to trade up, right? Like he wanted to do the whole, Hernandez wanted to trade back into the first round to get him. But I really, I understand the importance of a center, because I think there's just so much of a cerebral aspect to that specific position, especially when you have a young quarterback. And Daniel Jones isn't a young quarterback. This is still a second year. Maybe Michael Schmitz, when he gets ingratiated into the offense a little bit more, can help with protections, and Daniel Jones can focus more on coverages and things like that. I'm not really 100% certain how that responsibility is distributed, but at the end of the day, I know this kid is at least capable of doing that. And I had no idea about anything you just mentioned from Pat Leonard's article, but that's even more enticing to me.
Yeah, it's definitely very enticing. All right, let's get into your breakdown of his strengths, weaknesses, and your overall synopsis on John Michael Schmitz.
Okay. Good overall athletic ability in a well-built compact frame, quick feet, and excellent explosiveness at the snap. He is light on his feet. Lateral burst allows him to cover a lot of ground on the line of scrimmage. Oily hips, they're functional, allow him to redirect and redistribute his weight when necessary. Tight, quick, and effective ability to initiate contact in a very quick manner. A solid, technically sound blocker with his punch and his ability to frame a variety of different blocks. Frames blocks excellently in the run game. Feet, hands, and eyes all work in unison, allow him to maximize power with excellent timing. Plays with great leverage. Sturdy at the point of attack, constantly churns his feet through contact. Elite reach block ability, can cut off the angle of a 3 technique in outside zone. Does well to scoop, block, and position himself well on the backside. Accurate and active hands that carry solid weight behind their punch. Precise footwork as a run blocker. Excellent combo blocker, attacks the near hip, eyes up, smooth transitions up to the second level. Excellent range up to the second level. Utilizes solid body control on the move. Never stagnant, always readjusting his hands and resyncing his hips for a more advantageous position. Good anchor and ability to absorb contact. Stays in front of defenders well while moving, mirroring when engaged as a pass protector. Reacts well in pass protection, trusts his anchor, feet, and positioning. Smart player with active eyes, did a great job handling twists into the A-gap. May or may not eat glass. Very tough player who plays through the whistle. Aggressively finishes blocks. True offensive lineman mentality. Good grip strength.
Love it. Now let's get into some of your concerns.
More dynamic as a run blocker than in pass protection. Still good in pass protection. Only has experience at center. Not a knock, but a reality. With a full head of steam, he could get over his toes in space and not exercise the body control we're accustomed to seeing from him. When he looks for work as a pass blocker, his pad level tends to rise and it allows defenders to get underneath his armpit. This happened against Nebraska. This happened against Michigan State. This happened against Illinois. He will be a 24-year-old rookie. But overall, I do think this is a high floor player.
And then the final synopsis on John Michael Schmitz.
Yeah, he is a smart, physical, efficient moving center who is an excellent run blocker with range. His ability to reach block is ideal for zone rushing teams, but he can easily play in any scheme. Schmitz, see, this is one thing I have actually. I don't know whether I should refer to him as Michael Schmitz or Schmitz. So his name is John Michael, right? So I've been struggling with that since I started covering this guy. Regardless, back to the synopsis. John Michael Schmitz exercises good overall body control, footwork, and combo blocking ability while playing like a famished pit bull with uncooked sirloin at stake. Ha! Puns. Schmitz is a good overall pass blocker who is light on his feet. He does well in readjusting through reps to optimize his effectiveness. If I'm being nitpicky, though, I appreciate his run blocking more than his pass blocking. His pad level is generally good, but defenders have gotten underneath him while in a half-man relationship. It's not consistent, but it's worth noting. Any team should be happy to draft a player like John Michael Schmitz. I expect him to be a day one starter for a team. He's technically sound, has solid play strength, and can execute any block. He should hear his name called somewhere early on day 2.
Yeah, I think that's we said somewhere earlier on day 2. He lasted to the end of day 2, or sorry, not the end, the middle of day 2 with the Giants there. And what we would consider value at that point. I thought this was interesting. He said, what's his defining trait? He thinks it is his mentality as a whole. He said, my toughness, my grit, and the way I finish plays. And I think that's just checks out perfectly with the film I watched on Michael Schmitz. That's my favorite aspect of the game. The last thing he said, their toughness and grit. It's like a lot of these centers have it. It's the way he finishes plays. I love the way he finishes blocks in the run game. And that to me stood out. And he even said, I model my game after Bucs center Ryan Jensen, who he says plays the game as one of the nastiest people on the field in his mentality. You know what he's going to bring that mentality every game. And he said he's also a tremendous leader. Those are traits I think you're getting from John Michael Schmitz. Tremendous leader and a nastiness on the field, the way he finishes plays and his mentality. Even the Giants said it themselves. They said, this is a guy who you could hear it when Joe Schoen called him up to tell him it was the pick. He's like, hey, John Michael Schmitz. Cool. I'm going. It's like that kind of voice. He's not like, but they said when you get this dude on the field, it's a total opposite type of It's a mindset. He's nasty. He wants to finish plays. And he even says it himself. I play that style. And for my centers, man, I love that. That's part of the reason we all fell in love with Nick Gates, right? Like, I think you said it best, Nick. A lot of people inflated what Nick Gates really was and I trust your evaluation on film more than pretty much, I'm just going to say, more than anyone covering the Giants. And you always said, like, Nick Gates was pretty good. It was more of like he was a solid, average-ish center, for being honest. And he was nasty, though, and he finished plays, and he always looked for work. So to us, to a lot of fans who watch the film of that, they're like, or even the clips we cut up, they're like, oh, he's nasty as hell. He's always looking to finish plays. He's always looking for work. He's amazing. He's playing amazing. When in reality, he wasn't really making an amazing difference for the Giants. And I feel like with Michael Schmitz, we're going to love him immediately because of that nastiness, but he has an opportunity to actually make a lot of those plays that maybe some of the centers we've had really since Sean O'Hara haven't been able to make.
One thing about Nick Gates, too, is he embodied what it meant to be a New York Giant. Yeah. So that's another reason why we fell in love with him. But from a play standpoint, he was a solid starting guard. I think Michael Schmitz is going to be better than a solid starting guard. I think
he has a chance to be really good for again, not all pro ever, but potentially Pro Bowl every now and then. A Pro Bowl here, Pro Bowl there. And not that Pro Bowl matters anyway. It's a stupid thing to go by, but like Pro Bowl level season type of thing.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I know, but just like the Pro Bowl is such a dumb thing. I don't care if these guys make Pro Bowls like a fan. What is it? Fan vote. It's just so stupid. It means nothing. Even All Pro, I think, is kind of stupid, to be honest. It's like the AP writers are voting on it. AP writers are not watching all 32 teams. Like, they're definitely not watching any film on 32 teams. They're also just like not watching 32 teams. They're watching some primetime games, and that's it. So it's like, how do you really know who deserves this thing? I don't know. I just feel like there's got to be a better process for it. At some point, we need like 100 Nick Filatos giving out the all-pro grinding film of every single position player in the NFL.
I've been on this for a while, Dan, and I know I'm a huge Emmanuel Forbes guy. He's the big play dude in college football, but I think his tape also checks out beyond that. But I've been on this for a while where it's like, if you are a college football player and you have a primetime slot who plays at a team like Iowa, say, a team that doesn't get too many primetime slots.
Yes.
And then you go and you intercept a bunch of passes in that game, like Josh Jackson did that one year.
Oh my!
You're going to be talked about in the first round now. It doesn't matter what your tape looks like. Yeah. Everyone's going to be like, this guy's a first round pick. He intercepted Justin Fields twice. Yeah. You know what I mean? So like things like that happen. And then like that narrative gets cultivated and it gets pushed out, at least into the draft media. I think the NFL teams are a little bit wiser to things like that, but you always got to pay attention to that, right? But with Emmanuel Forbes specifically, I know he fits that because of the pick sixes and the big plays, but his tape checked out to me. And I got to say this, and I hate to say it, the Commanders, bro.
Dude, they got a lot of Nick Filato guys.
They did. Quan Martin and Emmanuel Forbes. I'll say this.
Good.
They could lose their coaching staff, though, at the end of this season, and a new defense comes in, and then who knows what happens to them. So it might end up busting. Everyone will be like, oh, Nick Filato's a dumbass. And I'll be like, yeah, situations dictate, bro.
These guys bust or do well. It's so dependent on their landing spot. Like, if we can't control that or impact that, obviously. I want to wrap up with this because I think it's a good little synopsis and a good way to kind of envision why we're so excited about what the Giants did on day 2 of the draft. And day 1 included, but just the entire draft so far through day 2. We got what, Nick? Like 40 people who submitted iTunes reviews with their mock drafts, right? If we had got one that was a 3-round mock and it was Deonte Banks, Michael Schmitz, and Jalen Hyatt, we would have been like, this is banana land. This is fantasy land. This is never going to happen. You're not going to be able to get Michael Schmitz 57. You're not going to be able to get Jalen Hyatt at 73. And so that kind of gives me, like, just from that, like, surface level viewpoint of it, it's like, yeah, I feel great about this draft because we got a lot of value level talent through 3 rounds where, if we'd done one of these guys through 1 round, we wouldn't have been happy if we took Jalin Hyatt at 25 and we panicked at receiver after that receiver one. But other people would have been like, yeah, I can see this pick. I understand why the Giants did it. It's not that bad. They got their guy, and now you get him at 73. And same thing with Michael Schmitz. I didn't want him at 25, but they took him at 25. It's like, yep. They took the need. Michael Schmitz, the best center. Like, instead, you just get that dude, Hyatt too, and Deonte Banks. It's like freebies. And it's crazy to me. So I feel like, this reminds me. I don't know if I've been happier through 2 days of a draft. I was thinking about that. I think somebody mentioned that to me on Twitter. They're like, this is the happiest I've ever been. And I was like, yeah, I'm trying to think of any draft. I was very happy the year we got Aziz in round 2. So that one rivals it to some degree. But we were
dubious about Kadarius Toney. Like, we weren't against it, but we were just Toney,
right.
we were just like, you need to have a plan.
We sold
for him.
ourselves on it a little bit more than anything else.
Well, we did, but we were like, we trusted that hopefully Joe Schoen and Dave Gettleman checked out this kid's mentality and character a little bit. And I'm not trying to take shots at him, but we knew that he had like gun charges and things like that against him. And I'm not saying that any of that has translated to his NFL career, but the fact that he can't really pick up an NFL offense seems to be evident with the New York Giants when Brian Daboll got there. And you can maybe even argue with Jason Garrett. And then even with the Chiefs.
Yeah, a little on the Chiefs just because he didn't have time because he wasn't there in the offseason. Yeah. So that one, we'll give him one more offseason there, but definitely with the Giants.
I hope that would have checked out. It did not check out. At least it doesn't seem like it. But in terms of just being a freak athlete, like that was a high upside pick, and you traded down, so there was a lot to buy in with that. And then you get a Z
at the time too. A lot of people didn't have a first round grade on him, including us. So I take
Urban
it back.
Meyer
did. Urban Meyer did, right? He only great. Urban Meyer, great. And Giants fans use that. It's like we got this amazing pick because Urban Meyer was going to take him. Like
2020, you and I were both excited because we got Andrew Thomas, who we both liked. We both liked Andrew Thomas.
I wanted Wirfs a little more. I feel like, but and actually, we both wanted Wills the most. I feel like, but whatever.
Wills was my tackle one because of his feet. Andrew Thomas, I think I said had the upside to be the best overall tackle. But Wirfs, I watched one game on. It was the only game I could get, and it was against Michigan. And Josh Uche bitched him the entire game. So
Uche's been a really good pro, by the way. He worked out really well.
Yeah, he's been pretty solid.
Great value pick.
Yeah, so Becton I was a little bit lower on just because coming from Google
this hour.
It was actually Diana. I don't really know why, but
is she in the house?
She is in the house. But regardless of the fact, we'll wrap this up pretty quickly. Oh yeah, it was a butt dial anyways. Okay, thanks, Diana. She just said sorry across my screen. But regardless of the fact, Xavier McKinney in the second round was huge. And then we got Matt Parrott, who was a high upside swing at pick number 99. So we talked ourselves into that. And I don't even think it was talking ourselves into it. I felt like the process there was pretty solid. Xavier McKinney was a first round talent, in my opinion. He just ran like a 4.6 something. And everyone's like, oh, he's slow. But it's like, nah, that dude processes. He's smart. He's not a 4. We watched the tape. He's not a 4.6 athlete out there. He's much better than that. So 2020, I would say, was the last time I was excited. But before that, I haven't been excited about NFL draft that the Giants had in years, man. It's been years.
And even 2020, which can rival with it, I'd still take this one because I love what they did in round 3. Instead of them taking a project pick like Matt Parrott, they traded up and got a value that was sliding in the draft and therefore became a really good value in Jalen Hyatt. If they had done that instead of Parrott, it might have been just as good a class, right? But, we talked ourselves into Parrott. It was fine, but it was still a developmental pick. And, Jalen Hyatt, I feel like, while there is some risk, it's not as much of a developmental pick.
Yeah, exactly. I'm right there, bro. I'm right there. I'm all about this New York Giants team. Yeah, this is very exciting.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning to Big Blue Banter podcast. Keep it locked and loaded. We're hoping this video, we do apologize for the technical difficulties with the last video. It took us a while to get it up. There was something with the file. We're hoping this one doesn't have it. I hope it doesn't.
It'll happen at times, Dan.
Oh, it took a while to get a lot of those jokes on today's podcast. Joe Tittman really can pull out with the best of them.
Pulls out with the best of them, bro. Not going to see a lot of babies walking around with mullets in the New York area. Don't worry.
I think is what you said. Great at pulling out, but we're hoping this one will go right up. If not, obviously let us know. We're gonna work on that. But some weird thing, you guys said you didn't get audio too. Some of you guys, I had perfect audio, and so did Nick. So I don't know what's going on there. YouTube, work on this. We want to get this turned around for the YouTube audience. Obviously, you can hear this on Spotify, and someone said they didn't get it on their Google podcast, but I think it showed up later. So nothing that we can really control on our end, but we're going to work to make sure that you guys get the show. But keep it locked and loaded. Not as busy of a day 3 it appears to be for the Giants. They've traded a lot of their day 3 picks. They traded 3 of their day 3 picks. There will be some picks to be made, so we're going to go over those. And we're going to have some draft recap stuff on Sunday, obviously, and definitely draft content through next week. We're hoping to get on some guests to talk about the Giants draft, both in-house type people like on Schmelk. I'm hoping to get keep throwing this out there, Schmelky, in case you're listening, but I'll be DMing you. We've been going back and forth talking. And then I want to get Ryan Wilson or someone else who's outside the organization to give us their opinion of what the Giants did. Is it as good as we think it is? I hope so. But anyway, have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.